Hello, my beautiful children, and thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Miss Vega Says What. I'm Miss Vega. Okay, so hello. Well, I decided to make this episode because lately I have seen a pattern happening amongst many of my friends, and that is that many of my friends who have kids that are in the tween or teen years, or sometimes maybe not even friends, but former students' parents have contacted me whose children are around this age. And what I'm seeing a lot of is this. Parents whose kids are really good kids, they really are genuinely good kids, are struggling with their peers, much more so than my generation or generations pre-COVID struggled with their peers, whether they were good or bad kids, whatever. So what I mean by good kids is that I'm referring to kids who are really like straight-laced, they like learning, they like going to school, they rarely make trouble, kids like that, are typically and have typically never had problems with their peers or didn't have problems with their peers before the pandemic, and maybe post-pandemic schooling has become challenging for them in the social setting. And by that I mean meaning really just school, because that's their most frequent social setting is school, so a classroom. So I wanted to explain what it is that's happening, since I know kids in my personal life, and as a professional teacher, I see kids, I observe them, so I see the data. So I wanted to explain it with some doodles, what it is that's going on. So if you're a kid out there and you're watching me, you could be like, Mom, Dad, this is how I feel. You can't explain it though, kid, what I'm gonna explain. And then if you're an adult out there, you can see the kid experience that's going on now versus what we may have lived through in the 80s, 90s, to even the 2000s before the pandemic. Okay, so post the pandemic, and you could just even do a quick Google search on it, mental health is a crisis in children, especially adolescents, and I believe it's about 60%, which is about 6 in 10 kids, or a little bit over 60% who are struggling with some kind of mental health illness, if you can say, like anxiety, depression, whatever it is, whatever it might be, like a change from where you were before or pre-COVID, right? So the statistic is really high. So I want to draw that out for you because it's different if you see it visually. So we're going to say that this is a classroom, right? And this is a classroom of 10 kids. I have 8 only right now. And really most classrooms aren't comprised of 10 kids. It's usually about 20, I'm assuming, with the teacher shortage. I can't foresee them being any smaller than 20. But we're going to just use the example of 10. Like I said, I only have 8 right now. So we're going to say that this is your kid, the good kid, right? And here he is. This is the majority of his classmates, because I actually represented it with 7, even though I believe the statistic is around 60. But I'm going to do 7 just because some go unreported, things like that. So here's your good kid, right? He's just smiling and having a good time. But these are his peers. This is his, whatever hours they go to school, let's say 9 to 5. This is his 9 to 5 life and existence, is to be amongst his peers. And as I say in many of my videos, there's no judgment on about these children right here. There's absolutely no judgment. It's an observation, but without the observation being said out loud, things aren't going to change. So it can sound like judgment to some of you, and that's okay too, but it's just an observation that this chipper kid's classmates are actually very lifeless. There's like a lifelessness to them. You could probably ask if you know any teachers, maybe in the middle school or high school range. Like there's post-COVID, there's like they might use harsher terms even. So it's not judgment. They're like lifeless. They're very attached to their phones. They're distracted. This can look like being disruptive or just totally checked out, like they look zombied in the face, or just lifelessness, right? And it can even be blatant disrespect towards the teacher. Your happy child witnesses that much at a much more frequent rate than my generation or generations before COVID did. So it could look like defiance, or it could look like just like a dead lifelessness. But either way, your child witnesses that, which is one thing. So you would want to consider as an adult, if I were in my place of employment and I really had like a upbeat disposition and everybody else was just always in a bad mood, you would notice that. Your child notices that. But if you're an adult, you have more coping tools. You're more understanding of people's backgrounds, and you're able to, separate yourself from that. But in adolescence, you don't have that logic yet, and you don't have that logic from experience yet. And in adolescence, if you remember, all you want to do is fit in. So they're really at a crux, because in adolescence, you want to fit in with the majority really badly, but the majority is them. So it's like this little dilemma, right? Like, do I be happy because being happy feels good and it's reasonable? I have nothing to be unhappy about, because that alienates them. That makes them different to their peers, right? Because just the way that the happy-go-lucky kid can observe the lifelessness of the majority of their peers can do the same. Just because they're lifeless and kind of like, depressed or whatever, doesn't mean that they don't recognize that this person still has life, and that makes them different. Even though it's a positive, productive difference that they're experiencing, to them, that is a different. So that's different in a way that can manifest as resentment. And when adolescents are resentful, it's not a secret, okay? If you're on this channel, hopefully you have an adolescent in your life, so you know that it's not a secret when they resent something, right? So maybe not all of them, but some of them could maybe be mean, like, hey, why are you so whatever, because they're different. And also these kids are suffering from like irritability from things like depression, anxiety, maybe some emotional neglect within the home. So they're already irritable. And they're noticing like, hey, why is this guy having a good life and I'm not, it's the same pattern that my generation and earlier generations saw in kids within their own classrooms. But if you really reflect on it, probably the numbers were reversed, where it was maybe like one kid was visibly depressed or down, and the rest of the class was kind of okay, and then maybe there was one chipper kid, or maybe like a 50-50 split or something. But now the majority of children, well, I don't want to say it like that, right? But very many children have a sense of lifelessness to them. So if you're in class and you're in the public school, because this is an example of public school, this makes it for a really lonely experience for this person, because there are maybe other kids, right? But what are the likelihoods that this kid and this kid are going to have things in common or going to want to hang out? And even still, it just reduces your social pool very much. And again, it would be as if you, in your place of employment, were surrounded by people with bad attitudes or poor ethics towards their work, because they do have poor ethics towards their work. You start feeling down yourself. You start coming down yourself from the discouragement. Whereas if you have camaraderie and you guys are peers and you guys all have similar mental health wellness, then everybody's kind of positive, and maybe the down person is the one who sticks out. Right now, kids are experiencing the reverse. So what I want to say to that is that even though being, upbeat, happy, and still being healthy right now as a kid is great, it's not easy. Because, and I mentioned this in another video, the levels of consciousness, your mood and your feeling state, we might think it's an up and down ladder, but it's not, it's a spiral. So when you're becoming depressed, it's easy to spiral down, but to keep motivated, to keep a hopeful, happy disposition can be work. Maybe for this kid, it's less work than it is for this kid, but for all the kids that have a happier disposition, that want to continue doing the right thing, making good choices. That's work. What adults call the inner work, right? Because they're having to constantly make a choice. Like, because remember, in adolescence, you want to fit in so badly. So for them to fit in, they would have to be them. So they're in their mind debating, do I be myself? Do I be, do I continue to be happy, be a good kid, do my homework, do this? Or do I go here? Just as any generation did, where they had inner debates of identity in that way. Now it's much more prominent and it's sharper for children. And I also want to say it ties also into peer pressure, because if your good kid is noticing like there's like a lifelessness or a lot of defiance within their peer group, then their peer group is also noticing them. And they have a negative mindset or a down mindset as it is, so they're not noticing them in a good way. They might be noticing them in a way where they're trying to like pull them into the feeling that lifelessness with them, because misery loves company, I guess. But you want to think of that in terms of how much mental and emotional work this kid is doing. Because if we were to suppose that one of them was like peer pressuring or bullying them into like adopting their ways, skipping class or forgoing homework, whatever, we experienced that also in our generation, and it felt hard. It felt hard to resist, and it felt hard to know how to do the right thing. In our generation, it felt that way. And for their generation, that threat of not knowing what to do, of being perceived as some way, is much more imminent, because they now have cell phones. So like in our day, if we were pressured and the person were to say, if you don't do this, you're a dork and I'm going to tell everybody. I mean, you have some thinking time, right? Because it's like, will they tell everybody? Will they remember? It gives you some thinking time to react most truly to yourself in that situation. But kids these days, if they were threatened in that way, like do this or you're going to, or I'm going to tell people you're this and I'm going to, whatever, if they're being threatened by something, phones. And even especially now with the live option, that can feel like a really imminent threat in adolescence if somebody is threatening to expose you in whatever way. Even if it's not even a bad thing, or you would be on the right side, just the threat of having somebody like that, it can be a lot of pressure for the good kid. So again, the good kids are doing so much inner work. And I really applaud good kids right now, man, because it is not easy. It's not easy to be the odd one out, because they are the odd one out sometimes. So with that, I want to explain a little bit of this lifelessness. Oh, my dog. So I want to explain a little bit of this lifelessness. That dog. So I'm going to explain the lifelessness because it can sound judgmental, and I'm going to explain it by explaining judgment. So about this lifelessness, again, it's not a judgment, it is an observation, and it is okay to observe things. It's okay to observe and state what you've observed, right? Because I'm not judging them by any means. I actually understand them, and I want to explain that. So a lot of kids right now, I mean, not a lot of kids, all the kids, they're on TikTok, right? So TikTok kind of gives you a judgy mind, and this is not me being opposed to cell phones by any means. I don't know what you guys want to do with your kid's cell phone, that's up to you. But I'm going to explain how TikTok changes your mind, and not changes your mind, but affects your mindset. So when you're scrolling on TikTok and you're seeing stuff and you're like, that's dumb, that's stupid, oh my God, she's ugly, what a jerk, what a this, what a that. Those are micro judgments, and it's not really fun, but what it does is it produces a habit in your mind where that's what your mind does. It's like, what a jerk, what an idiot, that's stupid, that's ugly. So even when you're off TikTok, it's not that you're a judgmental person, it's that your mind has practiced that mindset. Oh, what an idiot, what a this, of the creators of the TikTok or whatever. That now that's just your set in mindset wherever you go. And the thing about mindset is that when you do it, outwardly and you're like, what an idiot, she's ugly, she's this, she's that. And you also inadvertently assume it is a reflection. It's more of a spiritual concept, maybe than science, or both, I don't know. But when you're doing that and you're like, oh, she looks like an idiot, why would she wear that? This is ugly. You also reflect that back onto yourself and assume that their mindset is the same. So you, kid, are assuming that people are saying that to you about you too. So it creates really like a dark, toxic energy between the two parties. So I do want to defend them, right? Because it's not a judgment. It's just the phones have adapted their mindset, and it's difficult to be free of that mindset because it's difficult to be free of that phone addiction. But maybe I'll do a video on that. I don't know. So yeah, so that's the defense of the lifelessness. They're not inherently bad kids. They've experienced, just like the happy kids, all the kids have experienced the trauma with COVID and quarantine and the pandemic and masks and everything. So they are in a set of a trauma response. And I also want to say about these kids something else, and also them, also all the kids. Okay, let me just say it. In another video, I did talk about brainwaves. So I want to talk about brainwaves in relationship to this too, because I'm not even going to give you the names of each wave. There's more than 4 anyway, and which is what I explained in that video. But when you're born and you're from 0 to 2 years old, your brainwaves, just like your heartbeat on an EKG, I think, I don't know, that's what measures it. And like sound can be measured in hertz, your brainwaves can also be measured. So when you're 0 to 2 years old, your brainwaves, they're like super chill. They're just, and if you think about your body or the body of a baby, their body's like that too, just like asleep in bed. So this is like being in a dream but awake, and your body is like asleep in a bed. You don't even get your own food. You can't serve yourself. You can't go to the bathroom for yourself. And then from 2 to 6, they start picking up a little bit, but your body also matches, right? Like from 2 to 6 years old, your body picks up, as in you literally start walking, you start talking, you start grabbing things. And then at 6, you're really curious and imaginative and stuff. So then from 7 to puberty, they start picking up, and you kind of start becoming logical with what you're learning. So whereas here you were more imaginative with what you're learning, now you're like more logical and internalizing information, and you're really, really spongy. So once you hit adulthood, and also if you notice, when you're from about ages 7 to puberty, your body also matches, right? Your body is more steady. You're able to probably start playing sports and stuff like that. Your body matches what your brain and mind are doing. So like if you were to skip it, right? Like let's say you were to give a pencil to hold and write to a 0 to 2 year old, their mind and body wouldn't be able to function because they don't match. Like the pencil would be in their body, but their mind wouldn't match, so that it would be useless. And it's the same thing, which is what happens in the pandemic. So after puberty and into adulthood, your brain waves pick up, and they're focused on the outside world. Right here, 0 to 2, you're not worried about what's going on outside your own little body. You can't even, like I said, you can't even go get your own food. Then here, you're only worried about yourself. It's your body or mind could not think for the outside world. But here, from 7 to puberty, which are basically kids this age now, your body was set up to still be a kid because it's before puberty. But what happened is the pandemic brought the outside world into you, right? You were only, from 7 to puberty, you were still only supposed to be worried about yourself and your little friends maybe. You weren't really supposed to worry about the outside world in the same way that adults do. But because the pandemic hit if you were around ages maybe 7 through puberty, it pushed you into a more intense brainwave, but your body wasn't ready for that. Your body wasn't ready to process such heavy information. So it's like a state of shock and then depression. So that's what's, attributing to the lifelessness. Right? Because it would be the same as if a 7 to puberty age child would be responsible for driving, or because that's the outside world, since they're driving amongst society, or voting because that impacts also your outer world, society, right? So the 7 through puberty age really, in my opinion, took a hit, like a mental hit, and I can see why they're so depressed, because that was just too much for their little bodies. And then to add to that, they were given access and like made to have access to the worldwide internet, which has like a lot of adult information, but their bodies weren't ready for that. So it doesn't make them a bad person or a bad kid or whatever. It just like shocked their body, because that was really, really heavy. This age group, like 2 to 6, they probably didn't even understand anyway. Babies, but that 7 through puberty age, COVID really impacted both their body and mind. So that's what I'm referring to here. And I really just wanted to explain that, because being a good person, I think sometimes people misunderstand and assume that it's just happy-go-lucky and there's not an effort to it, but there is effort. And so if you are a good kid, particularly if you're an adolescent and you are trying and working to be a good kid, even though you see your peers are so different, even if your peers are seeing you as so different and you're pushing through, that is freaking such hard work. And I just commend you guys. And I hope my video helps, because I can't imagine parents who haven't been in a school system to know the feeling of seeing so many lifelessness children. And these are their friends. These are like what they have, their peers who they want to be with. But it's just as if you were to observe a person that was cranky or visibly just fully depressed, or something like that. If you were an adult and you were to see someone and it was undeniable, that's what your children see for a larger part than we did growing up as their peers and classmates. So it could be a lonely, isolating experience. So again, I just really want to commend the good kids out there that are still pushing through, and especially their parents. And that's basically it. So thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. Make sure to share with a teacher and an adolescent and their parents somewhere. See you later. I freaking love you.